It's absolutely fantastic. It's the very best possible end to the games. It's great for the individual athletes, the teams. It's great for the support staff that sit behind them, and indeed for both the wider sport of curling and indeed Team GB. Very, very exciting end to the games. Yes, I am. There's a really good structure behind curling, particularly north of the border. The challenge in many ways is to develop more curling rings south of the border so that more people can take the sport up. But there's a terrific structure behind it. It's very well run internationally. And so I really hope that this isn't a flash in the pan. Indeed, if you look back over recent Olympics, it hasn't been. There's something there, really good really strong grassroots, a lot we can build on and take curling forward. But one mustn't lose sight of the fact that this was a really fantastic result for both the men's and the women's team. You have to remember they started before the opening ceremony and they finished right at the very end. So it's been a long, long slog for those athletes, and they've really excelled. In terms of the rest of the team, what happens now is that there are a series of debriefs when they come back, sport by sport, which will look at what went right and what went wrong, and then we'll pull that together into an overarching debrief and hopefully learn lessons, identify all the things that went right, the things that went wrong, and then make sure that we're properly set up for the next Winter Olympics in Milan Cortina in 2026. It is disappointing. I think you have to be realistic about the fact that these are a uniquely difficult and challenging set of games, and that for many athletes, particularly in this country, who have to travel abroad to train, that the build-up to this games, because of coronavirus restrictions and the inability to travel, have been uniquely testing. But you're right, if you look at a sport like skeleton, we've had a long tradition of success in it. Bobsleigh is one where I've always thought we could do really well. It's a sport that would sort of naturally lend itself to our national traits and to the sports sort of infrastructure we've got in this country. So I think in both those two in particular, we'll need to look very closely at what went right, what went wrong, and then put it right for the next Olympic Games in 4 years' time, because they have to be sports at which we should have realistic medal targets. It was an enormous challenge, and I can't think of a modern Olympics that have taken place against a more challenging backdrop. There was the political backdrop to these games. There was then the challenge of taking a team from a country that is trying to learn to live with coronavirus, and indeed was in the middle of an Omicron outbreak, into a country where they're trying to eliminate COVID. I mean, they don't want to have it at all, and produce this very tight closed loop system. The challenges of taking a team into that environment when they haven't had a lot of time to prepare on the facilities, and doing so at a time when the wraparound that we put around the athletes in terms of pre-games training camp and a performance lodge. We'd signed up the Beijing Sports University for our pre-games training camp. We weren't allowed to use it at all because of the closed loop system. So it was uniquely challenging and difficult. And without making excuses in any way, you have to bear that in mind when you try and analyse what went right and what went wrong. Well, I hope not. I mean, I think there are two questions wrapped up in there. There's the bigger political one, and then there's probably the doping one that you started on. Right, okay. Yeah, I mean, it's in terms of the bigger political picture, it is really important that we maintain that the Olympic Games is not a stage for political protest or boycotts, and they just don't work. They're ineffective. There's no point doing them in sport when you have existing political and business relationships. So I'm wholly opposed to boycotts. In terms of doping, the really important thing for us at the British Olympic Association is that every single one of our athletes gets to the start line knowing that the competition is clean. And I'm afraid that has not been the case in a series of recent Olympics. And tragically for our own athletes in this country, one of the hallmarks of my time in charge of Team GB has been the number of British athletes that have been retrospectively awarded medals, having been denied their moment on the podium by dope cheats and often by a state-sponsored doping program. So the lesson for me coming out of the whole tragedy of Valieva, who must be one of the most extraordinarily talented athletes we've seen on the Olympic stage, and that's one of the ironies of it, is that the controversy around her entourage is not allowed to camouflage the series of missteps that occurred that brought us to this place. And crucially, above all else, that we do not lose that key guiding principle in the Olympics, that everybody has to line up on the start line, knowing that the competition is clean. And the moment you lose that, you lose the whole integrity of the competition.